Hi Bonnie, welcome back. So for this video, I'm going to do a demonstration of the of a profile view kind of drawing, and I'm going to use the picture of Rolf that you sent me in your last email as well. But for this one, I'm going to be working on my newsprint again, but instead of the Conte, I'm going to use charcoal this time, just because it's going to allow me to make corrections a little easier and everything like that. So I'm going to be using a piece of vine charcoal and a piece of compressed charcoal for this. So I'm going to use the vine to start because it's looser and it's a lot lighter. And everything like that, and then I'll switch over to the compressed to do a little bit of detail-y kind of things here and there. So that's basically what I'm going to be doing in this. But it's important to note that for this, I'm basically going to start off and do this the exact same way I've done every other drawing, and that I've suggested, for you to do every other drawing. So we're going to start, very lightly and work our way up to, broader detail and things like that. I'm probably not really going to shade this drawing very much either. It'll be mostly focused on line. But aside from that, I also, want to work from simple and basic shapes and then work my way up to more specific kind of details and things like that. So that being said, the other nice thing about doing the profile view is the easiest form of portraiture to do. Now there are certain challenges, don't get me wrong, because the curvature in the face and things of that nature tend to be a little bit more complicated than say other parts of like the body, like the arm or the outer part of the leg, that kind of thing. But it's not quite as hard as like hands and feet and things like that. But once again, the profile being the kind of easiest one, a good starting place before you get into like 3/4 turn, which is the most prevalent, and then like straight on, which presents challenges with like foreshortening, especially within the nose, things like that. But for this, I'm going to start basically the exact same way that I have, every other time. And I'm going to start in this sense by just making a kind of general kind of range of, how or where I'm going to work. So I made 2 tick marks, and I'm going to try to draw within the boundaries here. So I'm hoping that Rolf's head will basically, fit within these 2 marks. Now from there, I'm going to make a measurement as well, and I'm going to use my maul stick for this because I'm not using a pencil. But I want to say if his head is roughly that long, then I need it to be roughly just a little bit shorter. So I'm going to make a mark there, and I'm going to make a mark there. So I basically want his profile to fit within these boundaries. But from here, what I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to start making some basic shapes and angles, and I'm going to start by really looking at the kind of contour of his profile. So, and in that sense, I'm going to kind of generalize it quite a bit. So I'm actually going to start up top here and make a line. And then, so, I'm trying to look at like the kind of major breakdowns of his form there. And in that line that I just made, I'm looking at the kind of general angle between the top of his forehead and the tip of his nose there. So I'm trying to generalize that to some degree. And likewise, I want to do something similar there as well. And then from this line that I'm doing here, so if this line here was from the top of his forehead to the tip of his nose, then this line is the general angle from the tip of his nose to his chin, and this one being from his chin to his neckline, or at least, you know, where his neckline crosses the, you know, the vest in the picture, and everything like that. Now from there, I also want to do some subtle things. Actually, I want to adjust that. I want a little too extreme right off the bat. And so this line corresponds from kind of the back of the crown of his head to that part where, you know, your neck kind of starts to slope back in. And then from there, add something like that. And then I have this line which kind of comprises the collar of his vest, and we can, you know, add a little bit here and there on that. I'm actually gonna make an angle for the back side there, and I don't know, we'll do something like that, something like that. So I've got a fairly basic shape here, obviously, and it's made out of a variety of different angles. And these angles are going to help me kind of finesse some of the curves here in a minute as well. But before I do that, I want to make a few other angles with my angle sighting as well. And so the first one I'm going to do is his eye level. And I know that his eye level basically needs to come basically kind of right off of that, and be almost even with this, you know, kind of back corner shape here. So I can basically make just a light kind of mark there, and that's going to indicate the kind of line between his eye, as well as the kind of corner of the nose where the, you know, the profile dips in to the start of the bridge. But this is also going to delineate the beginning of his ear as well. And in that sense, I can also make a general angle, something like that, which is not only the general idea of his ear, but also catches a bit of the crease that forms between his neck and his cheek here as well. Now from that, I also want to look at the basic kind of angle of his cheek as well. So I've got a line kind of like that. And I also want to look at his basic eye line as well. And that would be like the top of his, or his top eyebrow or eye lid, the angle formed by that. And once again, I'm just checking against my reference there. So I have something kind of like that. Now from here, I can start to be a little bit more refined. So I can start making some more kind of detailed, you know, kind of things. So for instance, you know, I can start to differentiate a little bit more here and there. So say like his nose, we know that his nose needs to cut in further. And likewise, his eye needs to come out a little further. Now that being said, I need to move his eye placement over just a little bit, and hence why I'm doing this in charcoal, because it goes a little bit easier. Now from that, I can also look at some of these kinds of things. I need, you know, his actual, you know, kind of mouth line and things like that are going to be a little bit more, you know, kind of straight on than the general angle between the nose and the chin that I created right off the bat. And once again, this is going to look fairly rough right off the bat, but we're going to refine it some here in a minute as well. So once again, right now, I'm just trying to get basic kind of shapes and things of that nature. And at this point, I can also kind of make simple corrections to my general shape. I can also begin to round things off here and there and all kinds of things like that. So he's got kind of a dip in his head back there a little bit. And once again, we're going to refine things more as well. Now, the other thing I can do is I'm going to draw his glasses as well. And I'm going to consider this line that I made to be kind of the frames of his glasses, if you will. Because it serves, not only as a basic indicator of where, things need to be, but also it's kind of in just a generally a good place as well. But I'm going to make a mark just to indicate his glasses there. And I also want to make a mark or some marks for his ear in general. So, and once again, I'm trying to follow basic angles that I see to get a good basic shape. That we can then refine as we go. Now the other thing there is that, and we'll get into this in just a second, but generally speaking, the ear is also kind of interesting in that it can give you anchor points as well for various things. So let's also trying to think about some of those structures within the ear as well. Things of that nature. All right. So now we've got a kind of basic breakdown of the form here. Hopefully you can see that fairly well, or at least somewhat well. Now, something else that kind of can help us in our proportions are a couple basic measurements. And the interesting thing here is that there's this kind of measurement that between the, kind of corner or like the bridge of your nose here and the bottom of your nose, that same distance is going to be from that bridge to the top of your forehead, like where your hairline starts, but also from the bottom of your nose to basically about where your chin is. So we can take that general shape or that kind of area there, and we can measure it against our proportions, and we can see that I'm pretty accurate in that sense. Now, once again, so like basically we have kind of a kind of 1, 2, and 3 breakdown there. So that same basic size is going to be there, and there. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is that generally speaking, these also correspond to the placement of the ear as well. So the length of your ear is basically going to be from, once again, about where your eye level is to the bottom of your nose. Now, Rolf's a little different in that, as we age, your ears keep kind of growing, so especially your earlobes. So his ear actually goes a little bit further down below this, or at least where the nose line is going to end up being. But generally speaking, it's still within about that same kind of area. It's just once we start to refine and detail it a little bit, it's going to, kind of change somewhat. So from there, the other thing I want to do real quick, I want to make an indication of his mouth line there, and I want to make a measurement off of that. So I need his mouth line to be somewhat like right there, and once again, we're gonna make kind of alterations to some of these things as we go, but let's also all right, I'm also going to add a couple little things here and there. just to indicate some of his, you know, the folds and things like that that I can see, just to give us a few extra little kind of anchors here and there if I need it. Alright, the other thing I want to do, well, we're going to refine it some here in a minute, so we'll make judgments based on that. So I'm going to switch over to a smaller piece of vine now so that I can start refining things. But I'm basically going to do the same things that I've been doing so far. I'm just going to be a little bit more careful with them. And I'm going to, you know, kind of smudge out a few of these excess things here and there that I don't really need. And in general, I'm going to kind of take this down. Well, I went a little too much, but hopefully this won't be an issue. I'm actually going to switch back to my piece of vine that I had here. I'm just going to be a little bit more careful using more of the corner. So the other thing is that, you know, as you're going, you'll notice that certain lines, especially like in Rolf's profile, you know, kind of connect. So like the line of his cheek here is also the corner of his nose there and things of that nature. So, you know, we want to, once again, pay close attention to those things that we see. And, you know, especially in his profile, we've got a lot going for us because, you know, he's got interesting, you know, wrinkles and things like that. I don't mean to be disparaging or anything, but it just gives his profile a little bit more character and a little bit more for us to work from than, say, you know, a small child who, you know, has much more complicated and soft, subtle kinds of curves. Can be a little bit more challenging. Once again, a lot of this is subjective, but it also kind of depends on, you know, what we find easy, what we're used to doing, things along that line. So once again, I'm kind of going back over some of the general angles that I've already made, but I'm trying to also, you know, be a little bit more refined, a little bit, you know, pay a little bit closer attention to some of the details that I see, things like that. I'm also going to try to make some indications of various things, so a few of those wrinkles here and there. And I'm probably not going to do a ton of shading on this one. I might do a little bit just for the sake of, you know, showing how we can kind of represent a little bit of shading without doing a whole bunch of extra work here and there. Now, one of the more complicated parts of the human face is the nose in general, but I've also found that the nostrils are always kind of hard. And it's because we've got quite a few kind of subtle things happening in the nostril in terms of curvature and whatnot, what have you. So it can be kind of an interesting challenge, if you will. Now, so you can see, you know, using Vine charcoal on the newsprint, it's very loose, and so I can just kind of smudge things to get rid of them without having to like break out my eraser and everything like that. Now, something else I want to do, I want to make a general kind of mark for his eye there. And I know that want to come basically up to that first line that I made, and that we're gonna have that kind of obscured somewhat by the shape of his glasses here, which I'm gonna lay in something like that. But we can see that his eye is a little bit more recessed from where the actual glasses are. So I'm gonna make another kind of redefine that mark somewhat. But I want the top of the glasses to bisect the frame there, if you will. And then check my angle. So my angle can actually come back a little further. And once again, I'm going to leave a little bit more there because, you know, there's some kind of more interesting things happening. Now, the other thing is that his eyeball itself is fairly far recessed compared to, say, his eyelids, which come out a little bit further here and there. Something kind of like that. Now, the other thing I want to do too is, before I get too carried away with other things, I want to come over here and refine the ear as well. And so, you know, once again, I'm using the basic shape that I've created with my, you know, kind of angle sighting to reference some of the more complex curves I'm trying to make, and using those angles to help me kind of just round the curve off. So the angle's already made the basic shape that I need. It's just now I'm trying to come in and pull that, you know, kind of curve out from it. And so I've always found that doing the angles, even, you know, and the more angles you have, the more rounded you can really be with this. But this helps us to, you know, kind of finesse some of those things a little easier. All right. Now from there, I want to drop down somewhat. And get that, you know, curve coming in there. But I also want to use this kind of main thrust here as a pivot point to create that kind of fold in the ear, if you will. And that fold inside of the ear, in my opinion, is one of the most difficult parts. Because if it's not really correct, or if it looks a little weird, it's pretty noticeable. But at the same time, we can make it fairly easy without having to do, by once again just kind of looking at the various angles that we see in it and then coming back and finessing it. I feel like a big portion of really getting portraiture down and human likeness down in general is just kind of conveying the feeling of those things. And, you know, our brain puts a lot of information together for us, but by at least getting, you know, aspects of it down, it goes a long way. So once again, you can see I'm really not making crazy marks right now. I'm instead doing much more subtle kinds of things. And this went a little darker because I wore off the tip that I was using. But that's okay, because once again, we're going to start refining a little more here in a minute as well. So I'm also going to make a few little indications of some of the kind of wrinkles, shadows, things like that. I also want to make an indication of the frames of his glasses. Let's see, I've also made it a little too big there, in that I went a little too tall. But on the bottom it's pretty close. So I'm just gonna kind of go in and try to carefully go back over a few of these things. All right, so subtle little fix there, but let's also make sure to add in the frame there. All right, so from that, let's also go and kind of finesse the curve of his head here some. So I'm gonna start in the back, and I can already tell that the dome of his head needs to go a little bit taller. And so once again, this is a lot of back and forth kind of motion. However, we're fairly close here. All right. So, once again, we're gonna make some subtle observations and things as we go. Here. So we've got a fairly accurate profile starting to come together. Now from there, let's also make a few indications of subtler things. We're gonna say, you know, his hairline. Now, he doesn't have a whole lot of a hairline kind of going on there, but that's okay. A lot of what, you know, this would be, if I was really rendering him, would be done through shading and things like that. And I might do a little bit here in a minute. But let's switch over to my compressed, where I've got a little bit finer point. And I'm gonna break out my maul sticks so I can get a little bit more detailed here and there. But let's start to kind of refine some of these lines even more so. And what I'm gonna do in this, because in the image, I've got definitely darker areas where it's a harder, darker line. And so I'm probably gonna use that for more of his exterior, but within the interior, I wanna use that sparingly because I wanna look at some of the areas that have these kind of darker passages, such as like the corner of his nose, the inside of his nostril, that kind of deep recessed part of his eye, the interior of his ear, these kinds of things. So I want to be a little bit more hit and miss with this, a little bit less, you know, kind of everywhere. I want to be much more subtle with this. So forgive me if I'm kind of blocking the view a little bit here and there, but it's just because I'm trying to be, you know, more precise. But just going through, you know, I'm once again using the base kind of elements that I've I've laid in, generally speaking, with the vine charcoal very lightly, very easily, and I'm trying to look at those things and kind of follow along with them, but also refine them at the same time. So, for instance, his nose there comes out a little further here and there. These kinds of things. I'm leaving a few of these more subtle marks here to indicate subtler passages, such as, the top edge of his lip, which on the top there doesn't have as much of a hard line as, say, the bottom edge does. Things of that nature. And once again, I'm just trying to kind of, take my time, but also be somewhat quick for the sake of this. But I'm trying to, really look at different things that are happening. I'm trying to pay attention to everything that I see without going too overboard. Now, the other thing is, and this is once again kind of a subjective argument, is that in portraiture there's kind of two schools of thought. There is the thought that I should represent the person how they actually look, warts and all, blemishes and all, how they actually appear in nature, versus, say, flattery. And, a lot of portraiture that you look at in the past is definitely flattering the subject that's paying for it, for all kinds of different reasons. And that's definitely something that, is perfectly acceptable to do. Especially if somebody's paying you to, paint their portrait or draw their portrait. You definitely want to eliminate like every little kind of thing that you see and things like that, and kind of generalize them a little bit more, things like that. But, for this purpose, we're really trying to represent the subject. So, different kind of endeavor. And so in that sense, I'm not really trying to flatter him all that much. I mean, I'm obviously not trying to, do him bad or do him dirty by making him look worse than, or, older, all of that kind of stuff than he is. But I am trying to represent what I see in the image that you sent me. But once again, that's depending on what you want to do with your image, with your drawing, etc., you might go a completely opposite route, where you're trying to be a little bit more flattering to the subject. Once again, I'm trying to look at all of the different kind of major folds and things that I see. A lot of this is going to be made through shading, which once again we'll get into here in a minute. So sorry if you can't see, I've got to move down to get the things a little easier. Now another thing about the nose in general is that the nose also has some complicated curves in the top of it as well, in that they're kind of subtle, and some people have that kind of ridge here on the bridge of their nose and other people don't. Sometimes it's really subtle. Rolf's is very, very subtle. But once again, that's something that I feel like a lot of people get, kind of, or mistake when they do, noses, is that we tend to generalize it too much, like a cartoon kind of nose, and we don't look for those subtle things, those, kind of really, really fine curves and angles and things like that. So that's something else to pay attention to. So here we can see, once again, just kind of generally refining some things. Trying to look at some of the additional kind of finer lines and things that I see here and there. Once again, I'm not trying to go overboard or represent every single little thing, but we want to give a good sense of them as well. Now with that, something else I want to do is I'm going to kind of smudge out my broader mark there. And add a variety of marks, because, you know, if I was really rendering this, there would be passages here where I would like erase out a fine line, you know, to make that white highlight coming off of the metal. But for this, you know, I just want to kind of indicate only the darker areas. And likewise, also an indication of those nose rests on the glasses there. So we're just going to kind of bring out the edge of the glasses a little bit more without going overboard. All right, so from there, I'm sorry, I'm going to block your view a little bit here, but I also want to refine the kind of edge of his head there somewhat. Checking my angles. All right. I think that's a fairly good line for the back of his head there. All right, so now what I want to do is work on his ear just a bit. And what you saw me do is a very time-tested technique of, I didn't want to smudge his ear off. You know, it was a little too dark, the lines I made last. So I don't want them to be as dark and heavy everywhere, but if I wiped it, they would all go away. So I put my paper towel up and just kind of patted it, and some of that came off. So, but now once again, I'm going to go in and using the fine point, try to refine some of that line work that we see. All right, I'm going to do the outside first. Now, from there, I want to also come in and lay in that, you know, kind of crease along the back edge of your ear, because that will dictate a couple of other major things here and there. It'll give me anchor points from which to work as it relates to the interior part. The other weird thing is at the top here, there's usually this little bit of a bump kind of in this region where it dips down and then back up, and then before it turns over into the corner there. And so once again, that's one of those places where, you know, ears can be kind of weird and challenging because they've got these just, you know, kind of very, very subtle, nuanced kind of curves that happen within them. And once again, you know, getting those curves to read correctly is what really brings a lot of realism into the drawing. But, you know, even just having a kind of general feeling of it can at least elevate the drawing up and away from that kind of cartoonish look of just kind of oversimplifying and things like that. Now for the back edge here, I'm not really going to fully render it. I'm just going to make an indication of kind of where it's going to be. And that's because most of that would be done through shading. And once again, I'll do a little bit of shading on this as well, just so that we get a sense for it. But we do have a much harder line on this side. So there's some things I'm looking for. I'm also looking for areas where there would be differentiation in the light and shadow that we see, things like that. All right, so got a pretty good start going, a pretty good profile in general, but let's also come through and make a few marks on the neckline here, just to give it a little bit more feeling that this is something that's curving around and interacting with him. We've also got a little something like that. Something like that. And let's also say from here, we've also got part of his shirt that comes down. Something like that. So there's some things that we can work with there. We can also come off over here. Something like that. Make an indication for the highlight coming off of his shoulder there. You know, things like that. So that gets distracting from the overall profile view that we're going for. That we have here. So there we have the basis of a profile view, really. But once again, we can start to kind of emphasize certain things here and there by coming in and adding little bits. So let's do just a little bit of shading here and there just for funsies, just to give added emphasis to it. it's turning out to be a really nice drawing, I think. But once again, I want to pay attention to all those kind of subtle things that I see and things like that. And so, you know, with this, I'll also add little bits of detail here and there as well, just so we can get an idea. Because, you know, for your purposes, I really feel like you're probably going to be doing this more as a sketch kind of thing. And in that sense, we don't need to be fully rendered or anything like that. We can give indications of shadow and things like that without being, you know, too overwhelming. Things like that. So you see, I'm just kind of laying in some general ideas of where the basic shadowing is. And we'll kind of smudge and add some more and erase a little, and we'll do a variety of things here. Alright, so let's do that. So once again, hopefully you can see I'm doing this very lightly. I'm not trying to get rid of a lot of my marks. I'm just trying to kind of smudge some of those shadows and things out. But let's go back in, and this time I'm gonna deepen a few things here and there. So for instance, once again, I'm really just paying attention to where I see the darkest information, and that's where I'm laying this stuff in. I'm also going to, after I kind of smudge this, I'll erase some things back out, and then, you know, we'll also, you know, do a little bit more refining in terms of some details and, you know, things of that nature. there is kind of these kind of subtle half shadows that happen here and there, whereas the majority of the light's cast across, you know, this side of his face here, or the front of his face, I should say. But there are some kind of subtle things that happen. So once again, it's fairly decent. We're going to refine some more here and there. Alright, so from there, I'm going to switch over. I'm actually going to pull out my kneaded eraser this time. So this is my putty eraser, because with all this really soft, subtle stuff, I don't want to take too much of it away, whereas the rubber eraser would take a lot of it away. And then we're going to smudge a little more. And we're going to add some finer detail-y kinds of things as well. So you can see I've also got quite a bit of charcoal still on my fingers. I'm going to use some of that to my advantage as well. But for right now, I'm going to pull off, you know, a kind of pointy thing on my eraser here, so that I can do some fine detail-y kinds of things. So for instance, I'm going to kind of come in and refine my edge and pull out some of those highlights here and there. Things like that. Sorry, this is an old kneaded eraser and I need to get, well, I need to break open my new one. But I'm kind of reshaping it here and there so I'm not getting too much charcoal off, but also because I don't want to break pieces of it off necessarily. So this is what I really love about the kneaded eraser with charcoal drawing, is that you can really come in and do some really fine stuff, especially like with some of the wrinkles and his across his cheek here. I can just kind of make a general slew of shading, and then I can come in and pull some of those things back out without having to do a whole lot of extra work. And once again, I'll come back in with the detail-y thing here in a minute and pick a few things back out as well. So let's also pull a few things back out of his ear. His glasses there. Things like that. So try to clean him up along the edges a little bit more. The other thing I want to do is run my eraser down that line, because I don't want that line to be as dark as it will in other places. So I'm going to take that down. Part of this too, creating a nice realistic drawing, is creating subtlety and you know, kind of difference in some of your mark making. So, you know, whereas some things might be dark, others might be lighter, and what have you. So adding little bits of variation there can also add realism to one degree or another to the drawing as well. Even if it's a little bit more subtle, such as we see here, it can still help to add realism here and there. Now, the other thing I want to do, I'm actually going to do one more round of shadow here and there, just to deepen a few things before we go back and add some more detail. So let's do just a few little things here and there. All right, I think that'll be good. Once again, I'm not really worried about this drawing being super accurate. We're just trying to capture the kind of general likeness, if you will. Add a few things here and there just to give it a little bit more reality, detail, and what have you. All right. So once again, I'm going to go back in, and where I went a little too overboard with my smudging, I'm going to bring a few little things back out. That kind of deal. All right. Getting close there. Alright, so now this is what I did the extra shadowing for. I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm going to make a few kind of just dabbing marks here and there to kind of give a little bit of that hair texture. And then we're going to emphasize it a little bit more with some of the marks I'm going to make here and there in a second. So now I'm going to switch back over to my compressed and I'm going to redefine a few little things here and there. Some hard edges, backside of the ear for instance. A couple of these. Deeper, more refined kind of marks here and there. We're going to add just a few more little subtle kinds of shadows here and there as well. I'm actually going to flip this on the side for just a second. Oh, sorry about that. So let's also again redefine a few little things here and there. And once again, we're trying to pick out a few of the more prominent kinds of things that I see, but I'm not trying to be, you know, completely 100% accurate either. All that kind of fun stuff. So let's also Give them a little indication of the hair there as well. Just here and there. But there we've got a fairly good profile view. Let's also do a couple extra little things here and there just to give it a little bit more oomph, if you will. Kind of try to redefine the edge there some. And then let's really give it some contrast here and there. There we go. And you know, with this, because I'm just generally filling things in, I can also kind of make indications of certain things. And you know, so I don't have to be completely accurate with how I'm rendering some of that. But there we have it. There we have a basic kind of how I would go about drawing a profile, and then, you know, obviously a little bit of shading and what have you. But I think it's fairly accurate compared to the drawing, at least just from sight. You know, obviously I could go in and make a lot of debates and, you know, do a lot of fussing and everything, but considering the time frame that I've gone through so far, I think it's a fairly decent, fairly quick representation there. So once again, just to recap, you know, I started like any other drawing. I made a couple tick marks for my basic kind of size. I then, you know, went through and made a kind of basic shape for the head, looking at the generality of, you know, the main angles that I see. And then from there, I did a few delineations of main angles in the interior, especially this kind of triangle between the ear, eye, and chin there. So, you know, thinking about like the basic angle of the ear, as well as that curve or that crease between the neck and the cheek there, the kind of cheek in general, as well as the angle of the eye, inner angle of the nose, all of that kind of stuff. And then from there, it's just basically, you know, paying close attention to your reference material, and then making little adjustments here and there. And then that's really where it's all at. So you know, once again, profiles are one of the easier things to do because we don't have things like foreshortening to deal with. That's where we are, you know, like if I was looking, or if you were looking at my nose from straight on, things like that versus from the side, and, you know, things of that nature. So it's a good starting point, especially for things like portraiture. So once again, I just recommend that you pay attention to like your basic shapes and angles first. Start very lightly and then work your way up to dark. You know, that way it's easier to erase and make alterations and things like that. And then once you've got like the core, you know, of your shapes and angles down, it's really just paying close attention to what you see and trying to refine those, you know, subtle curves and things like that. So hopefully this is at least somewhat enlightening. Hopefully this helps out somewhat as well. But you know, thanks for joining me again for this video. We'll see you next time.